Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me for another Outer Limits review. Today I will be talking about Season 1, Episode 10, Nightmare, directed by John Erman and starring James Shigeta, Ed Nelson, and Martin Sheen. Um, Nightmare is kind of an interesting case. It seems like this is considered a fairly classic episode of the series, but I have to say, for me personally, this is the first episode of Outer Limits that I didn't really care for all that much, and there's a few reasons for that, which I'll get into. I do really like the message behind the episode and some of the things the episode says about how humanity treats each other under certain situations. Unfortunately, the episode felt very stagey and forced at times to me. I also thought it was very padding and actually had some issues with some of the acting as well, but I will get into all that as I go through the episode. So we start with a group of men, soldiers, and it turns out they're on a mission to go explore some kind of alien species. I think their names are the Abba Knights, who supposedly started some kind of war with Earth. So very early on in the episode, they are taken as prisoners of war, basically. They're captured somehow. It's not really said exactly how. Something happened to their ship, I think. So all the men give their names and their ranks, and there's a lot of characters here, probably too many characters, which is something else I'll get into the episode, but we're introduced to all the characters, get to know them a little bit. They're talking basically to this alien voice who tells them they're all prisoners, and one man, Private Dix, is already freaking out. I mean, like, really freaking out, which will be important later on. So one of the aliens, I did like the alien design. That was one of the things I enjoyed in the episode. So this alien uses some kind of device to make Dix silent where he can't talk, which was pretty interesting. So the episode's off to a solid start at this point. So one of the men, a Colonel Stone, one of the more main characters, speaks up for the whole group. He's like a spokesman, and he tells the aliens, what his group will need. Then we basically hear him talking to an alien voice. It's basically just a strange-looking cube, but it's 60s TV. What do you expect? It basically just looks like a square box. So at this point, they're basically going to interrogate the men one by one, which is part of my problems with the episode. These scenes don't really do a whole lot, in my opinion, and they're very, very repetitive. So Dix is taken away first, and at this point, we're also introduced to another one of the men. His name is James, I think, and it's made so he can't see for whatever reason. Won't be made clear till later in the episode. So at this point, Dix is questioned. The problem is he can't talk. Then there's these weird scenes where he's like hallucinating his mother, but yet somehow he can touch her, which is very strange. Then we're also introduced to this doctor who really has no points in the episode. I have no idea why he's here. He comes in and tells Dix to cooperate, basically, but Dix still can't talk. But like I said, then he sees a vision of his mother and he's able to hug her and he's able to talk to her. This is all some kind of trick by the aliens to try and make him give out information they want to know. So we go back to all the men and we get a little bit of background on another man, Lieutenant Krug, and his story is interesting enough. You have some sympathy for this guy, I suppose, but he's having visions of some bad things he did in the past. And this is basically all a trick again. He also sees, I think it's the same doctor that Dick saw. Like, I have no idea why this character is here. I guess just to make the men talk, contribute to that. It turns out, though, that Krug freaks out so much about what he did. He has so much guilt that he's a goner. He dies at this point. So we go back to the remaining men, and the next one called forward is Willow Moore. He's the guy that couldn't see. In the meantime, some of the other men that are left, who we really don't know much about, are becoming suspicious of each other. So Willamore comes back from his interrogation, and now he can see, but he's losing it because he saw Krug's dead body, which sounded pretty gruesome from what he described. So then we go through the same thing again with a man named Brookman. Like I said, these scenes are very repetitive and not very effective, at least in my opinion at this point, because we're given a little bit of information on each man, but we don't know each man that well to really get invested in their characters. We care about the situation because it's an intense, tragic situation, but not so much about each character. His story was a bit confusing and, like I said, just very repetitive. At this point, I would like the episode to move forward, although it's still somewhat interesting, to be fair. So after Brookman's part of the story is finished, we go to two men looking at pictures of all the men in a room somewhere, and to me, this was the worst scene in the episode. This gave away the entire twist that came at the end of the episode. I'm like, yeah, this whole thing is just some kind of test or something, because why would these two men be analyzing pictures of each of the captured soldiers? I really didn't get why this was put in the episode at all. So then we go to a man named Jong who's interrogated. Basically, he's more tortured than anything else. So at this point, the aliens come out and make a statement that the men won't be guarded anymore because they have the information they need. This makes all the other men suspicious of each other because, someone must have been a traitor and given away information. So the men all accuse each other, and Jong seems to get accused the most, although they all seem to have some reason for being the traitor. I did think this was done pretty well. You really thought it could have been just about anybody at this point. So at this point, eventually, Colonel Stone and the others do come to the conclusion that it had to be Jong based on some of the information he had, which was fine. So Stone at this point says that Jong has to be killed. They draw straws to see who's going to do it, which I thought was kind of strange, but whatever. I guess you just have to go with it. So Brookman is the one who draws the short straw, and he's supposed to kill Jong, but he says he can't do it. He says it's not really the right thing to do. They should wait, and let the courts decide what to do. That's what they would do if they were back on Earth. So at this point, Jong turns on Dix and hints that he might be the traitor, and Dix flips out again. He goes crazy. We find out later that he had a mental breakdown, I guess. So then we go back to the two men in the room that were looking at the pictures earlier, and they're talking to one of the aliens that we've seen throughout the episode. The alien's upset because we find out that this whole thing was a game, and the alien doesn't want to see anyone else hurt or killed. Basically, the alien somehow did something by accident that was seen that it could have been an attack. At least that's how the episode presents it. So this whole thing was set up as some kind of test to see how all the soldiers would react in this kind of situation if this really happened to them. So there was never any war or anything like that. The whole thing feels a little bit like a cheat, but at the same time, it's also very predictable. I've seen this kind of plot done a lot of times and done better, in my honest opinion. But there is an interesting speech here about how humans treat each other in war. I did like the message of the episode. I did like the speech. It could have come across as very preachy, which if you've watched any of my other reviews, some of you know I really don't like. But it worked for me. I thought it was fine and a solid message, if a bit long. So at this point, there's some of the men are still in the game. They attack one of the aliens, but Stone, who's found out what's really going on, stops them. But this whole thing ends in a disaster when one of the men is actually shot. One of the men that was looking at the pictures, because the men couldn't tell anymore if he was real or a part of the game. So kind of a tragic ending and a good lesson to learn. Like I said, I like the message behind this episode. I just didn't think the execution of the episode was all that great. And I thought some of the acting was pretty average in this episode as well. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but it was just okay. So overall, for me, Nightmare is an interesting episode, but ultimately it failed to leave much of an impact on me. It's very padded and repetitive, and I thought there were too many characters, which hurt your ability to get invested in them. So I'm going to give Nightmare a 2 out of 5. I would say that hardcore fans of the series might want to check this one out, but everyone else can pretty much skip this episode. So 2 out of 5 for Nightmare. And as always, thank you very much for watching.